I'm Kesenya and welcome to Guiding Star. This is the first astrology interview that I've ever conducted, and I'm very excited to have one of my favourite YouTube astrologers sharing with me today. I've got Heather from Beyond Astrology. Now, Heather, for those of you who don't know, Heather has a wonderful YouTube channel. I highly recommend popping over and following it. I'll put the links below in the description to this video. And she has a wonderful website as well where you can get terrific webinars and readings from Heather, and she has all sorts of great resources. But of all the astrologers that I've been interacting with and sharing with, Heather has such an amazing breadth of knowledge across many, many areas. And so I love having chats with her, and I'm really pleased to be able to have Heather with me here today. Heather, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. This is so fun. I haven't been on someone else's channel in a really long time, and I mean, I'm really honored to be on your channel because I think the same of you. You have such a wide array of knowledge from all these different areas, and I always learn so much when we come together and talk like this, so I'm excited.
Same. And I noticed that your Beyond Astrology YouTube channel has recently hit 10,000 subscribers, so congratulations on that. It's very well deserved. In fact, you deserve like 10 times that amount because you're so insightful and wise. I love listening to your videos, so congratulations on that milestone. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, Heather and I have been chatting about what we'd like to share about and talk about, and we decided that one of the really good topics that's probably quite pertinent actually while Jupiter is in the sign of Sagittarius is to talk about relocation astrology. So that's what we're going to be discussing today, and I'll just share a little bit about my recent experience with relocation astrology. This really hit home for me on my recent trip to the astrology conference that Lada from Astrolada hosted in Bulgaria, and I haven't been that far away from home since I discovered astrology, so I haven't been able to personally test relocation astrology until this trip that I took just recently. And just for those who don't know, which is probably most people, in my chart, my Uranus is conjunct with my moon in the 8th house, and I really feel that that's where I draw a lot of my astrological capacity from. It's 8th house rules astrology, Uranus rules astrology, moon is intuition, 8th house is intuitive, Uranus is intuitive. So a lot of the astrology, the way I do astrology, is quite intuitive. And yet when I went, that's the way it's set up for me here in Bulgaria, but when I went, sorry, in Australia, but when I went to Bulgaria, my ascendant changed from Pisces to Aquarius, still astrology, but my 8th house was no longer had Uranus there, and no longer had Uranus conjunct the moon. So there was not much happening in my 8th house regarding astrology. And I just found, and I said this to so many people, and I didn't realize this at the time I was there, that the big change that had occurred. I said, my head's not working. I can't get my head towards the work. The cogs just aren't clicking in like they usually do. People were asking me, oh, can you look at my chart? What does it say? And I'm like, I can't think. It's not working. My head's not working. And I said that to many people. It was so frustrating. And I looked and looked and looked for why that would be. What's happening? There's no Mercury retrograde. What's going on? And these transits. And I looked at my cartographic lines. Was going to talk all about these little bits and pieces as this video goes along. But I couldn't see why this was happening until I returned home and I started mucking around and changed my chart to my birthplace to where we were in Bulgaria. And when I did that and I saw that my moon and Uranus were no longer together, they weren't in the 8th house, I'm like, there's the answer. That just, it made so much sense. It gave me so much relief to know why I just couldn't do what I do here at home. It was so funny, Heather, because as soon as I got off the plane, it was like, ching, everything, all the cogs were back in place and everything was working the way it always had. And I'm like, okay, so there's lesson number one. If I want to practice astrology, I have to do it in Australia to do it the way I do. Otherwise, I'm going to have to change my whole system. which kind of sucks because I was hoping to do a bit of study overseas at one stage, but maybe I won't be able to do that quite the same way. But you've had really impactful experiences with your recent relocations, haven't you? Did you want to share a little bit about what you've come across?
Well, yeah, thank you. And that's really interesting. It is sometimes like that where, especially you have to look at the relocated chart, the whole chart. And that's something that a lot of people don't do. They'll go to the map and they'll click around, and that's fun and it can give you a little bit of insight. But where your planets are relocated to makes a huge difference in your experience. And you could have, you know, Jupiter on your midheaven, but if your Jupiter is really poorly aspected and really afflicted, you're not going to have a great time. And if you're doing that, and maybe you have a great Jupiter, right? Maybe your Jupiter is the most beautiful Jupiter in the entire astrology, right? And you put that on your midheaven, but it puts your sun in the 8th house, and suddenly things are like more intense and more serious. So that is something that you really have to account for. And kind of in line with what you're asking about my current relocation. So we've lived all sorts of different places, and I've traveled, especially all across the United States. My husband and I love road trips. I love going and taking my time and seeing all the scenery and stopping at all these different places. So we've been everywhere, and we've done some travel overseas in Europe and Mexico and things like that too. And there's a huge impact. Like when you look at the chart, it really describes your experience in that location. The relocated chart does. And so every time we've moved so far, I've just kind of been like, it's been happenstance. Like, okay, I feel like we should move here. The stars aligned and all of a sudden something happened and we're in this new place. And I haven't really gotten a chance to decide what I want for my relocation. Yeah. This move was very intentional to a certain extent. In that I wanted to be with Venus on my midheaven in the Denver Boulder area in Colorado. But I also was really liking the energy of the moon on my midheaven. I have a moon Venus conjunction, moon at 24, Venus at 29. And I was dancing between the two. I had friends that lived on my moon midheaven line, friends that lived on my Venus line. And fate kind of stepped in when I had an eclipse on my moon in January, and my husband got a job like literally smack dab right in between my moon midheaven line and my Venus midheaven line in the most beautiful place I have ever been in my entire life. And it's so perfect. Mm-hmm. And just looking at the energy, so it puts my ascendant is normally Scorpio, right? And my Mars, which is the traditional ruler of Scorpio, is very afflicted. Yeah. This actually makes me a Libra rising by relocation, and Venus on my midheaven, right? And ever since I've come here, like, I mean, everything was already doing really well with my work and all of that, but it's been just overwhelming, but in a very positive way, and it feels more manageable now. Yeah. And even connecting with people out in the community, like, it's just the vibe is very different. I'm getting different reactions and responses. People are just like coming up to me on the streets and talking to me, and it's just a very different experience than what I've had in the past, because we moved from a place where Venus and the moon were in my 10th house, but I had my moon, what was it? It was my Mars Mercury extension line. Like, they were crossing and it was the extension line. So it was a very intense, like, hectic time living in Arizona. Yeah. And to go from that to a Venus line where it's like, I can relax a little bit, I can breathe, you know, my work is going well, and it's kind of, it's not taking care of itself, but it's flowing much more easily. I don't feel like I'm constantly on edge and rushing around all the time. It's a very different energy, very, very different.
Yeah, sounds great. And there's just so much to consider when you're looking at relocational astrology, isn't it? Like you talked about the cartographic lines, and you've talked about the relocational chart, and it's very complex. I don't know about you, but sometimes I've been asked by clients, where should I move to be happy and to meet love and find love? And you're like, well, how big is the universe? Like, this is really, it's really helpful for people wanting relocational astrology readings to have a few places up their sleeve. I'm thinking maybe this would be good or this would be good, because otherwise you could sit there for the next 10 years looking at every place on earth to see what it's going to do for somebody. But yeah, so you were just sharing then that you followed your intuition basically, and it led you to the right place.
It was close. I was like in between these two spots, and it was like the middle part that I never considered, because there are no major cities out here. Nobody knows what's out here. I was on the other side of the mountain a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, yeah, I live on the western slope. And they're like, what cities are over there? What's over there? What's that? Like that part of Colorado just doesn't exist to people for some reason. And I was the same way until I came here, and it's like this beautiful, untouched, like, just it's like paradise. And don't move here. I don't want everyone to move here. Because it's like a secret.
Yeah. Oh, look, it sounds very similar to where I am in Australia. Most people in Australia are around the coast, and I live on the other side of the dividing range, and it's, yeah, the untouched wonderland, shall we say. But yeah, you like the privacy and the peace and the quiet, and I'm the same. But what you've expressed is that there is quite a difference, even in within a short distance from,
yes.
So I'm not really familiar with how that works, because obviously it took my trip to Bulgaria on the other side of the world for me to notice a difference, because my ascendant had changed then, and therefore all the planetary placements had changed. When you're looking at someone who's thinking of moving, say, 200 or 300 kilometers away from where they are, what are you actually looking at then to sort of indicate the difference? What tools would you use?
So that would be similar. It would be a more subtle difference, but I do have people that come to me for that, and it is something that I can look at. For example, like in my situation, it was going from being exactly on my moon line or exactly on my Venus line to being in between the two, where I'm not on either line, but the influence is there because they're like hugging my midheaven. That's a different energy. One energy would emphasize my moon very heavily, and that was apparent when I was in that location, that energy was enhanced more. The other enhances my Venus more, and that was apparent as well, just the same. I have this like merging of those energies now in this location. There's also, like I mentioned before, the extension lines. And even if there isn't a huge shift in planetary energies, like say you move 300 miles away and all your planets are all still in the same houses, like nothing changes, it's just a few degrees of difference of the ascendant and the midheaven and all of that. But you have an extension line. And so you go from having a location where it's like, maybe it's your Venus line there, to going to a location where your Venus line isn't as enhanced and you have this like Uranus moon crossing or something. And that's going to shift the energy, where it's going to be a lot of emotional ups and downs. It's going to be a more exciting energy maybe, but it's more unsettled. It's not the tranquil, peaceful energy of that Venusian influence, which is still there, but the predominant influence is going to be whatever is being highlighted in that location, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So sometimes 200 or 300 miles can shift like planets into different houses or put planets in different positions. It'll be fewer and more far between, but really you want to look at what planets are being highlighted in the astrocartography map and how that is enhanced in the chart as well. And that's going to bring the main differences if you're just moving a subtle little variation from where you were before.
Right, fascinating. So I had no idea that was that was a tool that could be implemented. Now I'm keen to jump on my chart and have a look, because 3 years ago I moved about 200 kilometers from where I'd previously been living, and the difference that I felt, the energetic feeling in this place is just so profoundly different. So I'm going to check it out and see what I can find. But if I know that you're currently running a special on your relocation webinar, is that right?
Yeah, so I do have a webinar where I go step by step, and this I did like last year, but it's, you know, a pre-recorded webinar. It's my most popular webinar, and it got only excellent feedback from everyone. So the feedback, if anything, is that there's so much information that they have to keep going back to it. So I'm really proud of this webinar, but it goes step by step through the process that I do when I do relocation. So you can start from the ground up, because there's so much to consider. And when I do relocation readings, I make them very comprehensive. I like to look at your birth chart first, and what's in your birth chart. So I look at the fourth house, the condition of the moon, the condition of the ruler of the fourth house, the IC, all of that, to determine what types of locations you might be happiest in. And I teach you how to do that. So are you better in a big city? Are you better in a rural area? Should you live in the mountains? Should you live by a lake? Should you live by a stream of like whatever? There's different indicators. Should you live in a really eclectic community or something more traditional, like a suburban sort of setting? So these things you can find from that chart. Or should you live as a nomad? Would you be better just like traveling around and not having, this grounded energy? Because for some people, being grounded in one place feels more unsettling than constantly changing it up.
That's
and
right.
yeah, so there's indicators for that. And then from there, you can look at timing of like, well, should I move? Is this a good idea right now? Is the energy behind it? And then after that, you have to start looking at the chart itself and then the planetary lines. And you have to look at the chart first. And so this goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning with your Jupiter line. Even some astrologers, and it's not because they are doing anything with malicious intent or that they just sometimes don't know. They're like, Jupiter, the great benefic, always good. Jupiter line, there you go, you're done. Yeah. Maybe, Jupiter does bring benefits even when it's really poorly aspected, but it's not going to be as beneficial as, say, maybe your sun is the best planet in your chart and it's highlighted with all these really nice trine aspects. It's, having, it's in really good dignity. And maybe your Jupiter is just in a T-square and it's like in its detriment in Gemini and it's like all this stuff happening, right?
I hate seeing charts with Jupiter in Gemini or Libra.
I have Jupiter in Gemini, yeah.
I do love your chart though. But yes, it's always a hard one to tackle because everyone thinks, oh, Jupiter's going to bring me good stuff. So sorry, I've gone and interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's exactly right. And so even people who are just like novices playing with the astrology, they'll see their Jupiter line is in a place, they'll move there, and then they'll come to me 2 years later like, this place sucks. What happened?
Exactly. And it's sometimes like well, I was going to say, people who want to learn about relocation astrology can take your webinar, but you also have relocation readings for people who perhaps don't want to understand the technical side of things. And so with your clients, at what point would you find that they tend to come to you looking for information for a holiday, or they're wanting to live somewhere else, or they're just, wanting some advice about different options that might suit them? What would you find your clients mostly coming to you regarding?
I mean, that's pretty much all of it, like the whole spectrum. Sometimes they're already moving to a specific place and they want to know what it's going to bring and how they can. This is another thing too. If you're not deciding where you're going to live, if it's just happening, you can learn how to work with that energy and what's going to be challenging in that location, so you know what you're up against and so you can work with it better. Like, maybe your Jupiter is not great and it's on the midheaven, but Jupiter can bring benefits. So how can you use that? What other planetary aspects are strengthened by this relocation? And where are there going to be challenges, so you're forewarned is forearmed, right? So you know what you're dealing with, and how can you use that more to your benefit so it's not as hard to deal with. And so these are all things. So people will come, they're going on a big trip and they want to know, where should they travel to? Mostly it's people who are thinking about moving to different locations. And then sometimes people are just moving and it is what it is, but they want to know how to make the best of it.
Yep. So they've got to transfer for a job or something, and they're moving from LA to New York or whatever, and they want to know what they're going to encounter when they're there and what the experience will be like. Those sorts of things people would come to you for readings for that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had a chat about, I was going to get you to do a relocation reading for me.
I'm going to do that, yeah.
And I've got 3 kids. So how do you then manage if you've got a family that's looking to relocate? You've got to look at, man, that's a massive reading. In my case, 3 kids and my charts, all what's going to happen to all of us. How do you tackle that sort of situation?
And so that one is where it gets complicated. I do offer a specific reading for 2 charts for like couples, or like if you're moving with a child or something like that. And I will sometimes do a 3rd chart. It does get complicated though. And I do want your children's birth information because I need to check this location. So this is where what I would normally do. I look at the primary person who is initiating the move and what they want, what their needs are, how it relocates for them. In the case of having children too, I can look at how this is going to change like your 4th house, your 5th house, anything that's associated with children. And that can give me a general picture of, you know, how that's going to shift and shape your relationship and how that's going to affect your children. So I would look at that. But I also want to double check if I find a great location for you and you have 3 kids and one of your kids is going to have a really terrible time in that location, I want to at least know that, you know, so maybe we can find a second location that's maybe not as great for you, but it doesn't, you know, harm your children. So there's a balance there that needs to be struck. You're never going to find the perfect location. I mean, maybe someone will, but it's going to be very rare for 4 people all at once. So you want to make sure that it's benefiting you and it's at the very least supportive of the other people. And that might mean negotiating a little bit. So that might mean that you don't get everything you want. You don't get the love, the career, everyone's like, I need the best place for career, love, friendship, money, everything. Like, you're probably not going to find that anyway, but even if you do, if you have children in the mix, that's what it is. It's about compromise. Or if you have a husband or, you know, a wife or, you know, a partner that you want to consider, you might have to negotiate, and maybe you won't get everything you want from the astrology, but you'll make sure that they're supported too. And so that's part of the process.
And I guess that's about knowing what is most important to you. What do you really want out of this move more than anything? You know, do you want your career to blossom? Do you want to find love? These sorts of things. So you've got to have a bit of an idea of what you're moving for as well. Yeah, rather than spinning the wheel and up. Yeah. So do you want to just share a little bit about planetary lines? Because a lot of people will have access to astro.com, and I know they've got their Astro Click map on there. If people haven't experienced that, it is a lot of fun to see, you know, what you might get when you go somewhere. Did you want to share a little bit about that? Because you do incorporate that into the readings too, don't you, as well as the relocation chart?
Yeah. And so regardless of what's going on in your personal astrology, you can click around with the planetary lines and it'll give you an idea of some of the energy that's going to play out in a more general sense. And, you know, it's completely okay to do. It does give you some insight. And what this is really doing is it's showing you so we have to back up for a second to explain the relocated chart, because the relocated chart is essentially relocating your birth chart as if you were born in these different locations. So it relocates the chart to these different spaces, and it doesn't change the aspects that your planets are making. It doesn't change what signs they're in, but it changes what houses they're in and the way that they align with the angles in the chart. Yeah. And so the angles for those who...
I did notice, sorry to interrupt, but I did notice with mine, because I was mucking around with that this week, I did notice that my moon, because it's at the latter degrees of Libra, did change quite significantly if I went to sort of the opposite part of the world. So it's probably the moon and the ascendant that are the most...
Did you change the time? Did you change the time zone to match that location?
I didn't actually, no.
If you go to astro.com, you can actually just click relocated chart for that location, and then it'll automatically convert all that for you. But if you don't change the time zone, that's not when you were actually born, because you were born at a different time in terms of the actual measurement of the time.
Right, so, well, that's helpful to know. Okay, so back to what you were saying. All these
Mercury retrograde, of course.
Yeah, of course. Maybe that's Mercury wasn't working there. I'll have to look into it. But yeah, sorry, back to what you were saying about the relocation chart.
Yeah, so if you're inputting the information correctly, it shouldn't change the degrees of your moon or anything like that in terms of the placement in the signs. But it changes where they're placed in the houses, so it changes the context and it changes the way that you experience this energy and the way that it plays out in your life. And so you're never going to get rid of that Saturn conjunction to Mars if that's what you're worried about. But you can put it in a place where it functions more efficiently. So maybe you have Saturn and Mars right on your ascendant, and that's been like the bane of your existence. You've had a lot of frustration and delays and, you know, all of these things that are associated with Mars and Saturn. maybe you want to move that. I find that Saturn does well in the 6th house. Maybe we put it in the 6th house. And maybe you have to work a little bit harder. Maybe, you know, you have to have a more regimented health routine. Maybe, you know, you have some struggles there, but it's not going to be affecting you as personally. And it's not going to be as predominant of an energy as it would be on your angles. And so you can do things like that where you're shifting the energy to a different place where it just, you're channeling it better. It works more effectively. Or you can highlight the planets on the angles. And so even in natal astrology, when you have a planet that's on one of the angles, that planet is strengthened. It becomes more important. And so that's essentially what we're doing by relocating the chart and looking at these lines. These lines on the astrocartography map show you at exactly which location you'll have a planet relocated to a conjunction with one of the angles. And so that planet is strengthened in some way. And so this is where, so this is really only looking at 4 main areas of life though, right? It's looking at your ascendant, which is like your personality, your persona, your body, your appearance, this like filter that you're interacting and interfacing with the world, your motivation, your drive. There's a lot of things that go with the ascendant, right? So you're looking at that, or you're looking at your home, your family, your property, your that dynamic. You're looking at your relationships, or you're looking at your career and your public status with those lines. So that it's limited in that way, but these are like fundamental, very core areas of life, and that's why they're the angles in our chart. They provide the structure for the rest of our life. And so you can enhance certain energies. And it's the biggest questions we get, I know this is the same for you as astrologers, are about romance and about career. So just by doing that, you know, it's pretty easy to find where's the best place for your career, where's the best place for romance, what's your best planet, how do we put it on that descendant, how do we put it on the midheaven? And then from there, you go in and make sure, if you do have the ability to look at the relocated chart, if you understand that, you can go in and make sure that putting Jupiter on your midheaven to enhance your career doesn't hurt other planets that are important to you or other placements that are important to you.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, I know you probably get this question a million times a day, just like I do. When am I going to meet somebody? When is love coming into my life? Every day. And I can't help but notice in Vedic astrology that February through to February 4 to March 22nd next year is going to cast a really heavy-duty energetic aspect of Saturn, Jupiter and Mars. Also Pluto's there as well, but Vedic astrology doesn't tend to use Pluto in the same way. But these 3 planets will be all together in Capricorn, and therefore if you're Capricorn rising or Cancer rising, this is going to Vedically aspect your 7th house for committed partnership. So I'm thinking about this, like the relocational side of things, and if people wanted to find you know, committed partnership or get married or find a lover who would stick around forever, you know, they could go to somewhere where their ascendant becomes Cancer or their ascendant becomes Capricorn, making therefore that activation of that transit applying to their house of committed life partnerships. Would that be a theory that would work with your relocational techniques?
You could do that, yes. Your birth chart is always going to be predominant, but aspects to the relocated angles do hold weight, but they have more weight in terms of your experience in a certain location versus, you know, your birth chart, which is more personal to you and your experience and your energy. So, short answer is yes, you could do that, and it might enhance that. Yeah, as an experiment. And I mean, there are people that do look at transits to the relocated chart. I don't like to do that. I like to look at transits to the person's birth chart predominantly. And I look at the relocated chart as almost like a story. Like, this is the story of your experience in this location. And so that's the way that I use that energy. But
so there are some people who on their solar return, like which I'll be actually having this week, their solar return, they choose, oh, I'm going to go and be in this particular country on my solar return because that's going to set up a really good subsequent year to come. Does this feed into the relocational idea of you know, changing the chart according to where you are?
It does fit into that same concept. And that is something that some astrologers do. I used to do all of my solar returns in that way until I moved far enough away where my solar return was different. And I noticed that my birth location for my solar return chart was way more accurate. My husband's was way more accurate. It was describing very literally what was happening. And so there are a lot of astrologers that say that the birth placement for the solar return has more to do with your actual experience, and the relocated is more to do with your perception and the way that you work with that energy. So it has more to do with free will. So it's like, this is fated, this is happening, this is how you act on it with your free will. And that kind of makes sense too in the way that people use that, because people they'll like relocate for their birthday only. They'll go like 300 miles, 600 miles across the country to a different country because they want their chart to line up in a certain way. And although I don't think that's going to change the circumstances, like the actual events that are going to occur necessarily, I do think that it can change the way that you work with the energy. And so there is definitely some weight to that, but it is a similar concept. It's like, you're not here anymore, you're here. So we're relocating your energy for your solar return, just like you would relocate. You're not born in Bulgaria, but you relocated your chart to Bulgaria, and your experience reflected that, right? And it was your perception of what was going on in your actual like experience, right, that showed up. So it makes sense, and those are very related.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like it's working with the energies and allowing it to unfold. But I like what you said a moment ago about the fate, and it comes back to that philosophical approach. And I know there's some variance amongst astrologers about whether things are fated or whether they're predetermined or it's free will. And so that kind of comes into it too, I guess, no matter where you are, like you fatedly are born in a certain part of the world for a certain reason to carry the imprint of the energies that you've got at a certain point in time. You're the walking embodiment of a moment in time, essentially. But that doesn't mean that I guess we can't work with the energies and enhance our lives as best we can, which is one of the great tools that relocational astrology provides. Do you have any really client stories about their experiences with relocation, that you've advised someone to go here XYZ and then this has happened or that's happened? Can you think of anything off your head?
I mean, there are a lot of different, examples that I could give. Things that stick out kind of more in a general sense, because I don't want to call anyone out. Would be like
permission, from people,
Yeah, absolutely. I did in the webinar give examples from people that gave their permission and their stories and their feedback about what their experience was. So if you do take the webinar, if you have taken the webinar, there'll be plenty of really concrete examples in there that are in more detail. But I have seen people, especially the biggest thing that I see is people moving to a Saturn location and experiencing a lot of challenges and hardships and delays. And so they'll move to a place like Saturn is on their midheaven, and they'll think, even if they know Saturn's in their midheaven, they'll think that they can work with this energy, and they'll think that they can make it happen in a certain way, and come to find out that it's like 10 years later and their career has taken a big hit and nothing's taking off, and they're having so many difficulties in their workplace with their bosses, whatever. And so that's when they'll come and they'll say, hey, I've been living on my Saturn line for all these years. I think it's not working. And the Saturn line one too is a big one, because you know how Saturn brings delays. It makes things take longer. Yeah. People usually stay in these locations with Saturn way too long. It's like, it's not been working for like 10 years. Why are you just now?
Yes. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and so it's the same thing with people. If they'll have Saturn on their IC, they'll have struggles with their family, with their home. They'll lose their home or something, and they'll have all these challenges in that area. And I've seen that actually a lot too. Or they'll come into that location, and then their relationship with their children will be strained for some reason. It's a lot of times it's a Saturn issue, and they just take a really long time to move from that place because Saturn locks you into that location. And it creates like a structure almost that people are really comfortable with. Like, yeah, my relationship is hard now and it's really a lot of work, but I'm comfortable with this. I'm going to keep going with it even though it's hard, until they reach that breaking point. So those Saturn locations can be tough. Even when you have a well aspected Saturn, sometimes there can be a lot of challenge there.
Yeah, because Saturn's shadow and light sides, they're pretty intense. You know, like, it's good to get maturity and responsibility and have a bit of, you know, social respectability and that sort of thing, which is the lighter side of Saturn. But yeah, carrying that stuckness of Saturn can be really, really tough sometimes. Yeah, even in good Saturns. Yeah. So I'm just checking my little notes here. At the beginning, we mentioned you have a webinar that's currently running. Do you want to like share about the special that's happening at the moment, and then we might wrap up, because I know we've got busy days ahead.
Yeah, so you can find the webinar on my website. It's called The Astrology of Place. It's like a 6-hour webinar all about relocation astrology. I take you step by step through the way that I do it, which works, you know, well for me in practice. Like, people who come to me know that I don't use anything that doesn't work well in the charts. And so there's a lot of information and a lot of misinformation out there about astrology these days, because the internet is such a wonderful place where everybody can share everything, but everyone can share everything, right? Yeah. So there's so much to sift through. And so I've sorted through it. I've used it in the charts. And so I know what works and what doesn't work, and what's going to bring a certain degree of accuracy. So that's what I'm bringing to you. So if you go out there and search on the internet, there's not a lot about relocation, right, and a lot of it's confusing or misleading in a lot of ways. And so that's what I was trying to do, is to give people a guide. Like, this is, you know, this is a practical way to use this information that works. And so the link is, it's on my website. It's astrologywithheather.com. And if you just click on Learn Astrology, it's one of the webinars on there. And yeah, I'd be happy to, you know, if you guys have questions, if you take the webinar, email me. I love answering your questions. And
well, I'm very keen to do the webinar, because the practice of, I mean, I know bits and pieces, but I haven't applied it, and I don't offer relocational readings or anything. So I'm keen. I'll be there, and I'll ask you lots of questions, Heather. So get ready. It's going to be fun. I'm really glad you offer this, because, like you said, there isn't a lot out there, and I've looked online for relocational information, and it's just, you know, unless you're really hunting for it and you know, got a mentor who can teach you, then it's hard to come by that information. So I was really excited when you shared that you'd like to talk about this today. I thought it's very pertinent, timely, and certainly something that I'm very interested in, and I know a lot of my viewers of my channel will be interested in as well. Yeah, you also offer relocation readings, so if they don't want to understand the technical side of things, they can perhaps get a reading with you as well. Yeah, and so I'll put all the links down below for Heather's website and for the webinar. But it has been such a delight to explore the stars with you today, Heather. Thank you for taking time out of your day to share this with us. I'm excited about relocational astrology now, because I have Uranus on my moon. I always want to move. Every 3 years, I feel like I'm on vacation. So
that's one of the things I talk about in the webinar too. I have a Uranus ruled IC. So I have Aquarius on the IC. I've been the same way until more recently. Saturn came and hit my Uranus, and it was like, all right, I'm sick of moving.
Yes, yeah, I know. My heart just like, I want to put down roots. I want to be established. I'd love to have you know, oh God, the name escapes me. Perhaps I'm back in Bulgaria and my head's not working again, but being able to have a organic kind of little farm and self-sufficient, and you know, that sort of thing is one of my heart's desires, and I just have never been in a place long enough to be able to establish something. I always have the intent to have a veggie garden, and I'll get to the point where I'm ready to build it, and then I'll sell the house and move, you know. So I've really got to work with that Uranus energy that wants to. Maybe what I need to do is live in a place that's more higher up, because Uranus rules high places. So if I
that's what I did. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll stay here. Maybe we won't move in 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's about, like you said earlier, it's about channeling the energy. So living in a high place when you've got Uranus strong is better.
I didn't even make that connection until you just said that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so okay, we'll start looking for mountaintops. Well, you're on a mountaintop, so you're doing, I'll come visit you. I'll probably do really well.
Yes, and oh my gosh, I have to talk to you off camera about the organic farming thing, but anyway.
Okay, let's go do that now. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Heather. Bless you. And I'll look forward to doing another interview with you again at some point in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Pleasure.